Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's MECLA Spotlight on data for decarbonisation. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to see you all. My name is Alexi Barnstone. I'm a project manager for the Materials Embodied Carbon Leaders Alliance, and just helping Hudson cover off on this introduction, as he's been caught in unfortunate timing with some traffic. But he'll be joining us very shortly for the panel discussion after the presenters that we have today. I'd like to start out with an acknowledgement of country. I'm coming to you all from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Um, it's more than just saying an acknowledgement of country. The purpose of doing that exercise is to reinforce the traditional ecological knowledge that exists among our indigenous communities, and reinforce that some of the work that we do today and the conversations we're having is in the service of those ideas that have historically existed in those communities. The preservation and symbiosis between humanity and nature, and to ensure that we don't damage a planet that is under an immense amount of stress through our industrial tendencies. Now, that having been covered off on, I'd just like to remind everyone of our governance structure. MECLA is emphatically pre-competitive. We don't discuss price. We don't talk about particular products and comparing. However, we are here to bring the ecosystem together, to collaborate, to understand how we can better accelerate this transition towards a net zero future. And when it comes to embodied carbon, the topic today is of immense importance, and that is data. Data accessibility lies at the bedrock of reducing embodied carbon, and without good data, engineers, specifiers, designers, and project managers can't reduce the embodied carbon in the assets that they manage and build. And to that end, we have four excellent presentations today from a range of different stakeholders that represent the ecosystem of what is out there when we look for embodied carbon data. We'll talk product carbon. We'll talk various different life cycle assessment approaches, the different ways in which we interpret and use that data, data aggregation, and how they plug into different tools such as NABERS, BASIX, and Green Star. Now, to set the scene and to cover off on where we're currently at and the state of play in Australia, I'd like to welcome Rob Rowett on to the screen and hand over to him for the first presentation. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Alexi. Much appreciated. I'm just going to click share here. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for the opportunity to present and to provide you a bit of insight into the world of LCA and EPD in my case. My name is Rob Rouet. I work with Star and I'm an LCA consultant. I work with a number of small to large construction material manufacturers, plus other companies, and I've been doing that for about 30 years all up, which makes me quite old, especially looking at all the interesting things that are happening and coming at us in this space. I've seen quite a few things over those 30 years, and what I'll do today is I'll provide you a bit of context as to what I think where we're at, what I think is important so that we can guide the discussion and the future development of these key data. As Alexi mentioned, it's very important that we have good data, but we also need to understand what those data look like. As I mentioned, I first started working on this about 30 years ago. And I started working with life cycle inventories of the concrete sector in the Netherlands in 1995. And since 1999, I've been working full-time in the development of LCAs and EPDs and carbon footprints and related areas. And I've seen quite a few standards being developed over the time. And as you can imagine, that in the beginning, this was all quite new and not much was out there. Even the databases were quite rudimentary. So it's been a great development to see that, at national, international level, we see these things developing and maturing over time. But forgive me if sometimes I feel like I'm traveling back to the future. I find myself repeating things sometimes as well that you may have heard from me before if you've spoken to me. And just a bit of context there, the very first EPD programs globally were launched in Sweden, that's the International EPD system, and in the Netherlands, MFPI system. And both of them were launched in 1998. And so it's great to see that in Australia since 2014, we've got EPD Australasia, and by all means, it's taken off, and EPDs are no longer a niche area, but are something that a lot of people start to understand. Now, when I go back to those early days in the mid 90s when that discussion played, how do we start with EPDs in the first place? Where did it come from? The driver was really industry. They needed a uniform assessment method across different jurisdictions. Say, for example, in the Netherlands, we had all these different councils with different requirements. They often were based on material characteristics rather than performance. So, for example, recycled content, a natural material, and probably my favorite, it's recyclable. And that was driving industry nuts because they couldn't really compete on that. It wasn't a proper performance-based assessment. It was just something that you either had or you didn't. And so they were looking for the introduction of a set of quantified metrics. That also then led to the demand for a level playing field and consistent compatible format in order for decision makers to assess products based on that performance. And to avoid greenwashing, the claims had to be independently verified. Now, as I mentioned, the LCI lifecycle inventory databases were still in their infancy, and the data had to be often collected or developed while the LCA methodology was being refined as we learned. Therefore, the assessments were not exactly low cost or quick assessments. Now, EPDs do meet the industry's requirements, and they've become a standard communication format in the built environment that's accepted by rating tools. In Australia, we've got Green Star and the Infrastructure Sustainability Council. In the US, we've got LEED, etc. And they're kind of expected on the major infrastructure and building projects, or at least for the key materials. And we even see it percolating into public procurement. And so for manufacturers, they provide an opportunity to demonstrate the environmental performance of their products and also to benchmark themselves against competitors and to focus their product innovation. If you've got clear guidelines on how to measure sustainability, you can actually work on reducing these impacts. So what are EPDs? They're based on standardized environmental lifecycle assessments, or LCAs. And an LCA is a decision support tool that can be used to answer a whole range of different questions. And as a result, there are many different implementations of LCA, which is both its strength and its weakness, I would argue. So the underlying standard is ISO 14040 and ISO 14044, which provides the basis for all other life cycle and carbon footprinting standards. But due to its methodological liberty, it does not lead to consistent results because it allows you to answer all these different questions. You get a whole range of different outcomes because you can approach the questions from different angles. So when we look at, well, how can we improve that? How can we reduce that variability? We've got ISO 14067, which already reduces the variability by locking down some of those methodological freedoms. If we then go a step further and try to reduce the range even further, then we get to EN 15804, which is a European standard for EPDs in the construction sector, and what we call PCRs, product category rules. They've got a greater methodological restriction, although there are some difficulties in applying that sometimes. due to the complexity of the interconnected life cycles and industrial processes, whereby we try to separate different materials and products, when in reality there is a clear connection between them. And recycling processes are a good example of that. You need to decide where one life cycle ends and the next life cycle starts. Now, if we really want to minimize that, we need to go a step further. We need to have these standards, but we also need to lock in what data to use. There are different databases out there, and if we do not lock that down, there will always be some variation and variability. Question is, at what point is it acceptable, and at what point do you really want to improve on that? Now, that doesn't mean that it's always a set result. There's definitely opportunities to change the data sets, and that will likely change the results as well. So we're not necessarily talking about absolute accuracy, but we're talking about transparency and a consistent way of measuring that and making that clear to everyone so they can act on it. And if we do see that there is ongoing learnings in the sector, then we can improve and change, make changes. So the process for developing a construction product EPD is that you first need to have your standards and your product category rules sorted. You then go and collect your data from the client, the manufacturer, develop a life cycle model, an LCA background report, and the EPD is kind of like a summary of that LCA background report. It's got an agreed set of indicators so that we can communicate with one another. And the EPD will have, more often than not, client branding. Both the EPD and the LCA are independently verified, and the verified document is published by a program operator. Now, where can we streamline that? Where can we find the greatest opportunities for efficiencies while maintaining EN 15804 compliance? And there's a few areas that I've highlighted here. Typically, the lifecycle model and report can be streamlined by creating sector-specific tools that limit the need for duplication. And a good example of that is the Global Cement and Concrete Association's tool. And they've also neatly indicated which areas of the LCA process they streamline and speed up. And that puts sometimes a share of the responsibility for the quality back on the manufacturer. And it's got great potential, but it also comes with risks, is what we've seen if that is not managed clearly, and if the manufacturer is left to work out whether they comply with standards or not. So the tools can be a great help by locking down methodological choices, but if they don't lock down everything, it can also create some issues later on, which is an interesting dynamic. And I won't go too much into it, but I think it's important to highlight, and I'll come back to that on a few occasions. So how not to streamline EPD development? I do think that's important as well to get into that. I think setting up alternative EPD programs with their own set of rules and guidelines, in this case different from EPD Australasia, is not a great way to streamline and to speed up EPD development. And that might be controversial in some cases, but I do think we have a risk that we're seeing alternative program operators being pushed into the market, and hence we lose that compatibility. We often also lose the impact and the contribution of the LCA community, which participated broadly into the development of EPD Australasia. And that's, I think, very important when we think of the original reasons why EPDs were developed. Now, even with the best standard development processes, we do find that rules are open to interpretation. So that's something that needs to be resolved. And I think that's what's being recognized as well, that there is that kind of variability still. So there's two ways that can be done, in my opinion. One is to remove the ability for interpretation, and that's where streamlined tools come into play. You lock down any variables, make sure it complies with the standard, and you can develop EPDs very quickly and efficiently. Or if that's still too complicated in certain areas, certain sectors, the production processes are not suited for that, they're more complicated, then you need to shine a light on it. You need to actually make visible where these issues occur. You need to discuss them, and you need to try to come to an agreement as a sector in order to improve everyone's standing. So I've been saying that for a while. I think we need more harmonization at every level. That comes back to the data, to the standards, the tools, and the interpretation. And the last thing we need is less harmonization, which is a diversification in methodologies. Um, some tools eliminate the need for a record for a background report. I think that's also a recipe for disaster because it becomes very difficult to do a proper verification for compliance. And I know that there will be claims that a lot of these things can be automated. I think it becomes a bit of a black box, and it becomes very difficult to verify that, especially if the tool is not locked down in its methodological freedom. And verifiers have an important role to play in making sure that all the elements of the LCA come together and are fit for purpose. I also find that there are some examples out there where the EPDs become very generic. And of course, you can speed up the EPD process, but not worrying and not reporting on any of the details. But then the question is, well, what are we losing? We're losing the transparency. And what result does it have? Do you need to document? Is that the final goal, or do you need to do something with that information? And I've put up an example here from EPD Hub, which is one of the new program operators coming into Australia, where the vast majority of their EPDs will say something like raw materials, no allocation, even though there is very clear information in other parts of the EPD that recycled materials are used in those products. So the model might be wrong, the model might be right, we can't say, but either way, the EPD information is wrong. And that's supposedly verified again and again. And so something is off. There are a few other aspects there, and I won't go into too much details, but I think there are some serious questions there to be answered. So would you consider it a good solution if we develop EPDs at low cost in a short time frame, if it comes at the expense of a level playing field between manufacturers, transparency and trust and verification? And we're having a lot of discussion in the market about where the balance needs to be and what the different solutions can offer. I'm very keen to hear from the participants. Put it in the chat if you can, where you see this being coming up. So the problems have been well identified. EPDs need to become more scalable. The costs need to come down, and the average time it takes to develop an EPD is too long. That needs to come down as well. I agree with all three of them. However, if we have EPDs from programs that don't commit to the same standards and product category rules, and they're not compatible and comparable, then I think we're introducing new issues that basically are quite similar to what we had happening in the early 90s. And I think stakeholders need to contemplate why they wanted EPDs in the first place. Go back to the basics. Final thought there, the concrete sector has evolved rapidly and currently takes up the vast majority of the EPDs published in EPD Australasia. And in my opinion, it's perfectly situated for more streamlined solutions. So I'm not against any of these tools in particular. If done correctly, they can be great solutions. And now we've seen that sector evolve. There's a lot of EPDs for raw materials, for the key raw materials like cement available. SCMs are still largely missing. And so there are ways you can deal with that. So you can have prescribed data for those SCMs, for the fly ash, for the slag, etc., that can be used to create a level playing field. At some point, we might then see EPDs being developed for these products as well. And an added bonus would be that if we had these harmonized tools for the concrete sector, it would take a lot of the pressure off from the rest of the EPD market, which often requires a more bespoke analysis. And so fit for purpose tools actually allow us to speed this up and to do it more efficiently, while at the same time respecting the complexity in other products. So we can ignore the learnings from the past, but I think it will come back to bite us. We were craving for a way to measure and compete in quantified metrics when I started this 30 years ago. And I feel if we're not careful, we might end up in the same position, but I hope we're going in the right direction. Thank you.
Rob, thank you very much for that. I think by finishing one with some good humor from Back to the Future, and I have to tell you, my puppy dog is called Marty McFly because that's a favorite movie in this house. But also recognizing that, yes, you've been in the field for a long time, have great experience, and have, I suppose, wise words of caution for new market entrants, new tools, and so on. As this is MECLA and we are looking at what is the menu of options for the market, we do have some of those new market entrants in today's conversation. So looking forward to hearing from our next speakers, but also in the Q&A, encourage people to pop questions in there because our panelists will continue to monitor that and can respond. And recognizing that there may be differences of opinion here. I think being MECLA, we're comfortable with that. We're keen to hear the different perspectives, recognizing we do that in a respectful way because we're all headed in that common direction of getting to a Paris-aligned emission reduction trajectory. So that's our core goal, but how we get there, it's terrific to be having a frank conversation about the emerging world, the really important world of data measurement for decarbonisation. Can I quickly apologise for being late? I got my hats in a little bit of conflict. It's my son's year 10 formal this evening, and I was driving him through afternoon traffic across Sydney. And it just took him longer to blow dry his mullet than I had expected, and I apologise that I'm a few minutes late. A big thank you to Alexi for standing in at the introduction of today's webinar. Right, Esther Bailey, can you turn on your camera? Esther Bailey, COO of Rebuilt. Thanks very much for participating today. I think what you're going to be talking about is one of the new offerings in the market. Very
Yeah.
keen to hear how you've gone about that, where it's come from, what it's doing, and then keep you online for conversation afterwards. Esther, thank you very much. Hand over to you.
Thanks so much. And disappointingly, for those of you who may have come for the BIF, I actually agree with most of the things that Robert said. So I think we will find considerable common ground here as we step through this. So first of all, yeah, my name's Esther. I've obviously been working in this space for 25 years this myself, in built environment, in policy programs, quite a lot of time with NABERS. So I really respect and understand the role and purpose of standards in helping to drive collective action and to help us move forward as a community, and very much put that community action at the front of the things that we think about. And the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, as I know it does many of the people on this call, is this rather big, hairy, audacious target that we have set for ourselves. So we need to make a 60% reduction in the embodied emissions in the built environment by 2035. I'll just pause for effect because that is huge. That is a sharper drop than we did in operational energy and commercial buildings in less time. So we really need to turn on all the taps. We really need to be working collegiately, and we really need to be drawing everybody onto the field to help to address that challenge. And it is, let's face it, less fashionable to say it now, but still a reasonably important existential threat, trying to deal with the carbon crisis that we're all staring down. Just a little bit more on the problem statement that we exist to try to deal for, and that is, again, to start off on the top left here, is to really to back in what Robert said. So we have used EPDs, we have used those category rules to develop a really good foundation for how we measure and manage carbon in the built environment, in the materials sector. And we started with the big, heavy, important stuff, and that's, legitimate. And now we have a very strong coverage in concrete. We have great maturity, and we've got some really good maturity in our big players. They understand the breadth of their impacts, they understand their carbon impacts, and they're on the journey. But the next thing for us to challenge is all of those other categories. You see that precipitous drop off in that donut up on the top left. We really start to be guessing once we get into those other categories, and putting all of our eggs into the concrete basket to get us to that goal is just too risky, and has its its own kind of structural material challenges. So smaller sectors may be able to move quicker, faster and deeper, and they need to be welcomed onto the pitch. And on the top right hand side is a chart from the Our Buildings Cost a Ton. It's a recent GBCA report, and really that's to demonstrate that there are emissions coming from every single part of the structure there. And at the moment we have a very limited view. Only 65% of those materials are not actually covered by declarations. On the bottom right, we see good old interiors. Hasn't had a lot of attention so far. Lots of small things that cannot bear that depth and expense and complexity of the traditional EPD method. But actually, once you start to factor in the turnover over the life cycle, become very important. And so all of that leads us to the need for an exponential growth in the carbon ratings in the next 10 years, and not just a growth in the ratings, but I would contend an increase in the pace of the indicators that we're seeing. With an EPD with a 5-year, or a PCF with a 5-year life cycle, we've got 2 data points between us and whether we've got there or not. And that's just not enough to help us to send signals, to build policy, to create incentives, to build market demand. So we need to think differently about how we're going to solve for this problem. The other big thing that's happening, of course, is that the things that people are being expected to report against on a sustainability framework are mushrooming out. So we had sustainability teams, as Rob said, were interested in recycling. They were interested in the human health of the products that they made. They were interested in supply chain. EPDs helped us to delve much deeper into those deep E's, the acidification, those impacts on land and sea and water and air. But of course, now what we're seeing is the advent of ESG, which blows it open even further, because now we're talking about risk, resilience, adaptation, and of course, good old Scope 3 emissions calculations. And so that is a lot for either a manufacturer or the receiver of data to be asking for from their supply chain. And that's why we deal with carbon alone, because it sits at the center of all of those. And you can build out the right way to report on all of those other aspects, dependent on your sector and the drivers for you. Just to tease into that a bit further, we're also seeing the regulatory drivers coming from a multitude of different places now, which I think has been the big evolution in the last couple of years. So Green Star has been very active in the measuring and requirement for upfront carbon at project scale since, I think, 2023. NABERS launched last year, starts to put a bit of frame around it, did a really great job on benchmarking and categorizing a whole bunch of materials, particularly in the superstructure category, and that's enabled it to be rolled into the planning requirements. Now what we're seeing is government procurement for sustainability and carbon coming through, and of course people who want to export are also being expected to provide that data on a periodic basis when you make a sale, when you get into a project, and those projects may last multiple years. But on the right hand side, what I would argue is the bigger part of the tsunami is, of course, Scope 3 requirements under climate disclosures, because that requires annualized reporting of everything that big companies buy. And so lots of people have, at that top level, particularly in our REITs, have had voluntary targets, SBTI targets. They've set their own net zero goals, and they are looking at their supply chain saying, how can you help me? How are you going to get me there? Mandatory is going to mean that means for everyone. And that means that the small and medium-sized companies who aren't picked up by that are still going to be asked to answer those questions by their supply chain, which means we need to find a way to enable them and to welcome them onto the pitch. Because if we don't do that, we're only deploying sort of half of our army of change makers onto the pitch, but also from an economic point of view, we're going to start to exclude smaller and medium-sized businesses from these big tenders and from large company procurement. And that is almost the opposite of what we've sort of set out to do with corporate reporting. We set out to drive action, to build it into decision making, to support innovation and to drive more choices into the marketplace. So that's the context in which we come to try to solve this problem. And our response to that is to be able to do verified, high quality, carbon only reporting, which is quicker, cheaper, faster, but also does not compromise the quality and the standards that Rob spoke to. So they're terribly, terribly important to us. And we're also trying to ride that knife edge between what do the building regs need and what does corporate reporting need. And essentially they are desk-based, risk-based, materiality first, assurance, which is aligned with all of the relevant standards that you see on the right-hand side there. And I'll drill into that a bit more because I know this is one of the most important things for people on the call who are concerned about whether we are interoperable, whether you can compare the numbers, and whether we are bringing some new confusion into the market. And my key message is that no, this is not confusion. This is another pathway within the ISO 14000 series, and it is entirely comparable and interoperable. So we are a life cycle assessment. We use 14040, we use 14044 as our foundation for the way in which we calculate. We also use 15804 as our product category rules because they are very much, thanks again to the EPD crew's work, the established standard in this market. But then we just calculate carbon and we leave the other EPDs for people to choose to buy into later if they need to do that. And then we also apply some efficiencies with technology and validations and try to, use computing power for inputs to make sure that we streamline that. And so in that way, we can produce a carbon number, which is an LCA verified against an ISO standard and can be used inside of any of the standards you see there, Green Star, the ASRS, Climate Active, or NABERS. So I didn't really talk too much about what our offering is, but just for clarity, we have a platform where manufacturers can put in the materials, their source, their energy from their factory, their recycling, their packaging, the usual inputs that you would expect in a A1 to A3 LCA. And they can use that dashboard to tease out what's the difference between different variants for different mixes if you're in the concrete space, or if you're in the furniture space and you've got hundreds of different variants that are quite minor in difference, but you don't actually know how much global warming potential difference that's driving. So you can learn. We're teaching people to fish, not just giving them fish. And we're helping them to set their own trajectory based on the savings that they identify. Then in the second piece, when they're ready to verify, when their supply chain says, I need the report, I need the evidence, then they go through a verification process that submits to our LCA team, who are ALCAS professionals, who are ex-EPD Australasia board members, who have been working in this space for 20 years apiece, and they will review the required evidence to back up the self-report that has been made by the declaration owner, and only then is the verified report provided. And they also get a data quality report that tells them how not everyone's numbers are perfect. We use EcoInvent and AusLCI to back up where they don't have data, and we give them some guidance about where they might want to work in the future. And then, because putting that information in the public domain is very important, we have a marketplace, and we also want to work towards this data exchange so that we are working as an ecosystem, and we'll obviously tease that out in the discussions that will come in a moment. We put a load of thought and care into the verification process. It's ISO 14071 aligned. Happy to drill into that if people want to know. The report, very plain English, very much intended that you can pick it up and you see the numbers that you want straight away. Lots of people have reported to us their struggle to interpret the amazing results that they get from an EPD. So we just wanted to surface that and make that really clear and plain to people. And then it's about communicating. Have that conversation with your supply chain. Tell them that you're working for them. Tell them what you need from them, because that is where we start to drive action forward. And lots of people are responding super well to this. So we're embedded in Green Star and NABERS already. We are aligned with the Climate Active standard. We obviously fit International Construction Code when they finally release, because we're inside of NABERS. NABERS global protocol alignment I've talked about, and a whole heap of corporate procurement, manufacturers in a whole diverse range of sectors, and also consultants. So obviously, Nikki and Jason will talk about how they use a tool to support their customers to work out so what and what next, and we do the same. So we would work with the consulting sector so that they can also have those meaningful pre-sales conversations with their customers. So hopefully that gives you the view on us. Hopefully it gives you comfort that this is not something new and weird and different, but indeed it is the next simplified iteration that uses all of the amazing work that's been put down before, and hopefully makes it more accessible so that we can accelerate action over the next 10 years.
Esther, thank you very much. You mentioned that it was in plain English, and that was very clearly articulated. So thank you. Please do stay on the line, because we do want to bring you into the conversation when we have our panel discussion. And it's great to see questions coming into the Q&A. If I could say to the panelists, by all means, feel free to answer those if it's your area of expertise. What I'd like to do now is introduce Jason Chandler and Nikki Jackson, the co-founders of EPD On Demand. It may just be one of you, I'm not sure. Oh no, we've got both of you. Excellent. Now, you guys have also been significant contributors to the working group, the Cement and Concrete Working Group, and that will become evident why you have gone into this business angle with your supply side expertise. And hearing from you as cement and concrete experts. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for making time to contribute to today's discussion. I look forward to hearing from you both. Over to you.
Easy. Thank you, Hudson. Hopefully you can all see that okay, but my screen's just gone weird.
Yep, nice and clear.
Okay. Yeah, I can't see much else. Again, back to the BIF, we would probably agree with what was said with Rob and by Esther too, in regards to making sure that we're all aligned, same rules, same data, same structure, all makes sense. So again, we would definitely agree with that as well. So why was EPD On Demand? We're here because our primary goal is to help decarbonise the construction industry. We understand that EPDs are an important tool. They're there to measure the progress and the journey that we're going to go through. And they're going to help with the selection of lower carbon products, but they shouldn't be the main game. So, it shouldn't be where a lot of people should be spending a lot of time, money, and focus, is where we sort of see that. Is it working? No. There we go. So where do we sit? At the moment, we think that's what we're getting feedback from our clients is that where we are at the moment is expensive. I think, that was alluded to earlier on, and time consuming. Again, that's two of the highlights, I think, in Rob's presentation. So again, we're sort of aligned with that. This sector of the concrete and the construction industry, they embraced sustainability, but they need some flexibility as always, because as we start doing these unique projects, there's unique mix designs that just need to allow to run. And we need to be able to produce those data points, but also allow construction to continue, because construction just doesn't stop. We're not going to sit here and wait for 5 months to pour a suspended slab. It's just not going to happen. We're hearing that the costs are considerably more expensive for single EPDs compared to what we can do with, obviously, time leads. Again, that's just sort of following on to earlier discussions. And again, we're concrete technologists. We're seeing so much time, money, and time and devotion set against doing EPDs that can be, the process can be quite complex, rather than defunding the decarbonisation strategies. So again, that's as concrete technologists, we just want to get on and decarbonise the industry while making sure that we do, measure that data properly and capture it. So where do we sit? We're sort of in between the status quo and PCS, with obviously the added benefit of us being concrete technologists and having some technical oversight. And to be honest, we've been here as well since at least 2010, since we started recording and documenting embodied CO2 in concrete. You still there, Jason?
Sorry, folks, the mouse was not behaving itself. So as Nikki said, we've been on this journey. Rob showed his journey at the start of the presentation. I probably did my first sort of life cycle analysis is what it probably turned into, but it used to be we just had to report the carbon. We used to have to report how much cement we used. We had to report how much fly ash we used, how much manufactured sand, all that sort of stuff. But in 2007, there was a paper published by David Flower and Jason Jane. And this paper actually, it's the first time I've actually read the paper. I've used the table on the right, quite a bit as I went in and read the papers. There's the system boundaries. There's basically what we're doing now back in 2007, and these guys came up with some default values that we used in the concrete industry when we were essentially showing our decarbonisation potential. And these values became they're default values. They're not exact. They're not EPD verified or anything like that. But they were calculated by these academics and published, and it became the basis of what we were reporting for quite a few years. So if you just go forward, Nikki. And here's an example of the Green Star report. It's only a small project, 25,000 cubic meters. And just, stop there for a second. So there's this particular project, 25,000 square meters. And as Nikki said, you need to be able to move quickly in this game. Okay, 44 products are used in 25,000 cubic meters. Okay, if you need an EPD for every product, you can't wait 6 months, and you don't know what products you're going to need at the start of the project. I worked on the North Connects tunnel here in Sydney. It started with about 30, ended up with over 100. Okay, things change in the construction industry, and we need to be able to move quickly and efficiently and cost effectively to achieve our goals. If I have a look down the bottom of the next little clip, Nikki, we were reporting this CO2 emissions. They were just approximate sort of numbers, obviously, but we were reporting these back then. We didn't need to. It was just something that we were doing because we could see the writing on the wall, I suppose. And we see EPD Australasia, I think, was 2016 had the first EPD. So we were reporting these things at that same time that EPD Australasia was getting off the ground. So the next one along, Nick. And this is the other thing. All these reports were based on real hard data. It wasn't just someone saying, "Oh yeah, we use this much cement in our concrete or this much fly ash or whatever." It was batch records. We got technical because we understand the technical side of things. We got down to looking at moisture contents of aggregates, portioning that between the aggregates and the water content of the concrete. There were data integrity checks in there, just making sure that if there were any errors in the downloaded data, we were able to find them, and we managed them out. And I think that's the end of that particular.
So how's the concrete industry evolved? I think we've seen this. I think this is a nice one. But just to give you an update, when we released the first low carbon concrete guide back in April 2024, we had about 1,200 EPDs from an EC3 database, which was up to about year 2023. We had no 2024 data in there. We are about to go into version 2.0, which should be released later this month, hopefully in about 6 to 7 days' time, all things going well. We haven't updated the draft just yet, but as of the 30th of July, so it's almost sort of 2 years onwards from the dates, that we've got 5,422 concrete EPDs that we're using in the low carbon concrete guide version 2.0. So just for that, I think there's a little bit of a round of applause required for the concrete industry to say, yep, you guys have really, as an industry, we've jumped on board and we've published a lot of EPDs. So outstanding work. But sometimes too, when we get more EPDs, you start to see that scaling friction. Okay, unexpected inefficiencies, errors. There's bottlenecks as well that emerge during the scaling up as you get larger. That's similar with any scaling up, whether it be a process of EPD or scaling up new and novel raw materials, SCMs into the industry from these new startup materials. The scaling always happens. We're seeing lengthy delays in the EPD being drafted. Again, it's just repeating what we've seen earlier on. And can be giving a competitive disadvantage. We're getting some more errors that are a little bit obvious as well to the reader, which could, again, same thing, could indicate that the background report might not be correct, but we just don't know. Just an example, this is from a concrete technologist point of view, this is the PCR rule for balancing biogenic carbon in these materials where it's stored for 100 years without being incinerated. So basically, an example I've got here, we're working on 1 kilogram of concrete admixture. It's got 243 grams of biogenic carbon, which need to be balanced in the 1 kilogram of unreinforced concrete for end of life to make the balance system balance out, right, as a virtual emission. reality is that 1 kilogram of unreinforced concrete was probably more likely to have 0.43 grams of concrete admixture with about 0.01 grams of biogenic carbon. So as much as the rule's in there from a pure technical point of view, it doesn't make a lot of sense to best represent the end of life of that concrete with biogenic carbon from the admixtures. It's very small. So this is from the Eco platform and the current PCRs that we have in here. And again, this is where we're starting to see some new rules that came in, especially on the 20th of June this year, which kind of got the concrete industry a little bit up in the air. Because for what it's looking for is that there should be economic allocation given to these low-hanging fruits like fly ash. But which gives you the breakdown there. So slag, coal-fired power, silicon, which is densified silica fume, and anything else arising from it. Slag's generally well taken care of because you'll see a pig iron allocation done, especially through LCI, so that's okay. But for fly ash, we definitely haven't seen that. And again, we're just sort of seeing this in the recent EPD that's published after that date, that it's all the burden's been given to the power station. Now, we do know because an EPD has been done for fly ash here in Australia, but this is truly a waste product and no allocation needs to be done because it's a run-of-station ash. So instead of going into the dam, it's getting processed and it's getting produced. So we are starting to see this material come through.
Okay, and this one, everyone, this probably explains what really got me into looking into EPDs and how we can make them better. I was looking for some information on a material. I won't tell you what material it was because the question's going to come. I was looking at information on a material, and there was an EPD, and the picture. Well, let's just say the picture on the left here that's me holding some sand, and on the right is me holding some ground granulated blast furnace slag. Okay, if we go to the next picture, Nikki, this is a picture that is on a fully verified published EPD, and well, I say guess what is verified to be. The fact that I'm saying it probably tells you that it wasn't sand. Okay, this is an EPD for a slag. It's a really obvious, as I say, a picture tells 1,000 words. When I, as a concrete technologist, see this, and I think, oh my goodness, And I looked into a little bit more. The EPD producer in this case was based in the state of Australia that I know as a concrete technologist didn't have a long history of use of slag. The verifier was based in a country that I know absolutely because I've worked over in that part of the world. Don't have a lot of, or they have very little slag. If they do have slag, it's a blend of cement. So they might not even know what slag is. But it's been published, it's been produced, and it causes someone like me to look at it and think, gee whiz, I didn't know that you could get yellow slag. And then I look closer and I think, oh, that's just sand. And why is he holding it without a glove on? But anyway, so these are little errors that come in because the verification process is focusing on the LCA process rather than what's the information actually going in there. So if we go forward, Nick, this is me still. And as Nikki pointed out, as things scale up, which the EPDs in Australia definitely has, and we've seen that from the numbers. Okay, what works in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, into the 2020s, I honestly don't think it can work anymore. Okay, and one of the reasons could be the way that data is submitted here. Current EPD Australia process requires data be formatted in a very specific format. So you have your EPD, then you have a data sheet, then you have your background information, and it all just gets a little bit convoluted. You have to manipulate the information, and Rob mentioned the GCCA tool. I've used that for some EPDs myself. It's up to the operator to basically take the outputs and cut here, paste there, type here. It's not an automated process by any stretch of the imagination, and errors can happen, whether it's typos, formula inconsistencies. I had that happen to me. It zeroed out things when I copied and pasted. So if we just go forward, Nikki. So this is the extract from the GCCA tool. I like the GCCA tool. I'm not saying there's anything drastically wrong with it. It's just here's the extract, this has already been converted from a PDF document to an Excel document. Okay, and we go forward. We then take this data and we convert it into, Nikki, in the next page, the EPD Australasia data set. Now, I'm not going to go into detail, but I can assure you that all of those indicators are not in the same order as the indicators that you get out of the original tool. So you've got to cut, paste, get them in the right order, hope that they're in the right order, hope that you've got the units of measure right, all that sort of stuff. On to the next page, Nikki. And then we haven't actually seen our EPD. This is just all the other data that you've got to put. So this is the metadata sheet that you submit, where you're basically taking your EPD and you're putting all that data into a different sheet and submitting that. And that, A, takes time, which seems a bit over the top, and B, it brings in the chance of errors. And I've certainly made an error myself doing it at one stage. So on.
Next. Right. So we ourselves were reviewing, recently we were picking up, putting some data in for a client, and we know that there was a few discrepancies just in the basic mix designs that were submitted. They just weren't yielding properly. So we were able to sit down and discuss with the supplier, explain that, this doesn't look correct. These weights don't add up. It's not working to how we would know or what we would understand of concrete, especially where you're getting your raw materials from. And basically, when we went through the exercise, we looked like there was about a 6% impact to the GWP for the concrete. Again, I know it's within that 10% that people allow within it, but it's still not 100% factual. And I suppose coming from that technical background where we want to be technical correct, then we just need to get that mix design. So that's sort of some of the areas where EPD on demand is able to assist with that from the process, to making sure we get the accurate input and accurate data so that we can use it. So some of the things that we found, again, it's similar things, Rob pointed out with the EPD hub, same thing. There seems to be some errors floating around. We found 7 environmental indicators for one supplier. One supplier uses the same mass for their declared, even though their products we know they've got a different mass. They don't have the same density per cubic meter. We know that. We seem to be admitting the fuel used for mixing during dry batching places. Again, it might be small, but again, it's a small detail that goes into the whole process. We've seen EPD dates, published dates in the future. So they've been up on the site one day before the published dates on the EPD. And again, that might be a process of the other complication of that system where you've got to put forward the dates and it just happens quicker. Some product content has got some mass balance missing. It doesn't appear to with electricity that transmission will seem to be included as well. Again, it might have been, but it just doesn't make it very clear to us when we're looking at some of the EPDs. That's you guys.
That's me. So what's our approach? We've sort of looked at why we're in this game, because we've seen that there's opportunity to make things better for the industry. And when I say the industry, I'm talking the concrete industry. Okay, that's what we're here for. We're here to serve. One-click LCA is the software that EPD On Demand uses. We get access to worldwide EPD electronic data, and all the LCI databases. I don't know whether it's exhaustive, but there's hundreds of thousands of data points that you can choose from. There's no need for manual entry, so you just pick. Yep, this is this. So I'll use a company name. Boral Cement has an EPD. Then you say, yeah, I want to use that EPD, and bang, all that data from that EPD comes in as your data for however many kilos of cement that you're putting into that concrete. And it has a separate verification process. So it's, you can't just go ahead and put numbers in and say, oh yeah, I reckon I might use, cement from, I don't know, Italy in Australia. I don't know where the best, actually Norway. Norway's probably got the best EPDs for cement at the moment with their carbon capture. So you can't just say, oh yeah, I'm going to use that because that's a low number. So no, you have to get your selection verified prior to being able to put it into your mix designs. When you set up your concrete batching plants, you have to get that verified before you can start producing EPDs. So there's sort of verification process that happen before you get into I've just produced 70 EPDs and oh, we've made a little mistake, but it's going to be really hard to go back and change. So let's just go through to the keeper. There's also completeness and plausibility checkers. So for the person who's putting in the data, have you got all the data that you need? Okay. And then it does a plausibility check around, okay, there's some information in here that, you might want to have a bit of a closer look at. Now that plausibility checker the plausibility checker goes also through to the verifier. So you can say, yep, I'm comfortable with my data, but then the verifier says, hey, but what about this? And you've got to be able to explain it. Environment indicator values go directly into draft EPD. There's no copying and pasting. No chance of those sort of errors. They picked up by EPD Hub, verified against the EPD Hub GPI, which is as per Eco Platform rules. And there's an opportunity, we believe, for EPD Australia to look at a similar sort of a model. We're not saying, oh yeah, use EPD Hub, it's awesome. There's things there that we'd love to change, and we're working with them to make better. But equally, we'd love to work with EPD Australasia to make that process better. We don't care. We just want to get EPDs out there in the market for concrete, and we want them to have the right data. And we combine these operational efficiencies with our knowledge of concrete and construction materials to, basically be able to make these fast and much more cost effective than previously.
I'll just add one quick thing, Jason. When we talk about the 100%, like there is a lot of data points, but it comes from actual published EPDs. The main database is EcoInvent. At the moment, it's 3.11, and we do also use AusLCI database. So it's still, from a database point of view, it seems to be aligned with what Rob and Esther are using too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So our thoughts, we agree with the simplicity. One platform, one rule. This is the rule. Don't have, a bugbear of ours is EPD International takes what's there and then says, oh, we need to change the rules. Okay, let's just go back. One platform, one rule, and then everyone playing off the same hymn sheet. Streamline processes. That way, resources are deployed where they're needed most, i.e., reducing carbon. Utilize pre-verified tools, databases, and AI for that eco-platform compliance. So it shouldn't be up to individual people to go through step by step. And Rob showed the EPD verification checklist. Okay, I'm certain that some sort of AI could very easily say, yep, does this match that or not? Tick. No, it doesn't? Okay, send it back. And then use the AI plausibility random checks from experts. I mentioned it, Concrete New Zealand has an audit program over there that they kind of keep their concrete suppliers on their toes. And that way we ensure that the information provided by manufacturers is accurate. And I saw a question coming in the Q&A about 5 years of data. These are valid for 5 years. We got to have a way to be able to update these things fairly quickly and easily when circumstances change, when rules change, when materials change, when electricity usage changes, all those sort of things. So, we're after reducing the CO2, using EPDs, using concrete mixers, using our knowledge to make the world a better place. I think, there we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stop sharing.
Jason and Nikki, thank you very much. You are right about being detailed and technical. That was terrific to hear your industry expertise and diving into the technical nature of things. And I'm really keen in our conversation to come back to, I suppose, the risks about data transposing from one spreadsheet, one format into another, and how you overcome that risk. But for now, thank you very much. Let's move on to our final speaker, another Jason. Jason Bovis, founder of the Low Carbon Materials Hub. G'day, Jason. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Very keen to hear your perspective and contribution to this. And then let's move into the panel discussion. So stay on the line after you've presented. Over to you now. Thank you, mate.
Thanks, Justin. Jason, co-founder and CEO of Low Carbon Materials Hub. Today's session will cover product LCA, EPDs, and PCFs. And we do have a lot of data over there, but how do we use it? So I'm going to share my experience, how we use digitization to bring those data together and make the application of those data much more accessible. I'll start with a quick introduction of ourselves. We're a data and technology company on a mission to demystify accessing and measuring carbon for the built environment. And over the past couple of years, we've been focusing on how we make EPDs faster to access and easier to apply. And to tackle this, we've built our AI infrastructure to establish the largest digitized EPD database in Australia and also bring this data into real project workflows. We developed NALA AI, which is a agentic AI model that automates upfront carbon assessment and EPD mapping. So today I'm going to share how digitization and AI, this combination, is unlocking the true potential of the product EPD and PCF data. I'll walk you through some real examples to show how it has already helped the industry make better decisions. So before diving into the technology, let's have a look what's actually happening here in Australia. What's the landscape of EPD look like? EPDs have grown drastically over the past 2 years. If we look back in 2023, so before that, we have less than 300 EPDs published across this whole country. And in 2023, we have 146 EPDs published. And just a year after that, in 2024, the number jumped nearly 9 times. So we have over 1,200 EPDs published in 2024, and for this year in 2025, with projection to go over 3,000 EPDs. And on the right-hand side, it shows the distribution of the product EPDs across different material types. It's still very concentrated in the concrete sector, as we can see from the percentage over here. But what's exciting is now we're seeing more suppliers from the other materials categories starting to join this movement and disclose their product environmental impact. The EPDs have actually been around for quite a while, but in practice, they often been underused. And the challenge now isn't that we lack data. We do have abundance of EPDs over there. The real problem is how this data exists. So most EPDs live in PDF documents, isolated, static, and each presented in different format. So even though the data is there, it's trapped. It's really hard to search, really hard to compare, and nearly impossible to automate things. And that data lockup creates problems across every part of the value chain. And for the industry, that means if there's a lack of real market data to support effective benchmarking, standard setting, and policy development, we could end up making big decisions without the full picture of what's actually happening or what's actually available in the market. And for project team, limited data accessibility means the workflows are still largely manual. It means professionals are spending countless hours collecting PDFs, extracting data, and matching them line by line to produce a carbon report. And digitization bridges the gap between the data information and intelligence. So firstly, enables faster access to data. The team can instantly retrieve and integrate digitized EPD data across their tools. It removes the friction of manual searching and data entry, and also it drives greater transparency and comparability. When data is structured and standardized, we can make clear, consistent, and evidence-based evaluations between materials. It means that we finally can compare apples with apples. And also digitization paves the way for a digital product passport, which connects product directly to their verified data. So what does digitization actually look like in practice? And here's the first example, our digital EPD platform. It's a unified, digitized environment that brings together verified EPDs across Australasia and turns them into a accessible, searchable, and comparable database. And through the platform, users can browse products filtered by material type, product type, suppliers, region, and they can compare materials side by side based on their environmental performance, or GWP, and benchmarking position. We use and train AI to read and parse the EPD data, regardless what's the format of the EPD. So we turn those static PDF data into a live, interactive, and consumable data sets. And this is a snapshot of our database. It currently includes over 3,600 EPDs, over 16,000 products from nearly 190 suppliers. The growth rate of products is currently over 1,000 per month. The second example is how we use digitization to enable material benchmarking. Nikki and Jason mentioned MECLA have this low carbon concrete guide version 2. So that's basically we've been working together this whole year using digitized EPD data to make this happen. And this version is a major step forward. As Nikki mentioned, it's around 1,000 concrete mixes in the first edition. Now it's actually over 5,600 mixes. I mean, without this digitized data set, it's almost impossible to keep track of the current market data, especially with the current rate of growth. And by leveraging this digital live concrete data, and for the first time, we've established both national and state-specific benchmarks, giving the industry regional relevant insight into the carbon performance for the concrete products. It also aligns with both GCC, a global low carbon concrete rating, and CCA's Australian adaptation, which is going to be launched on the 9th of December. And with this live benchmark, the dashboard now updates dynamically. So basically, whenever there's new EPDs, it'll be pop up over there and reflected in the dashboard. And you can see from the box and whisker chart over there. And on top of the benchmark for the actual products, we've also extended the benchmark to individual concrete suppliers. So basically giving the industry a clear visibility into each supplier's product range and what's the performance look like and what's their market position, and understand how supplier compare their product against the national and state benchmarks, and understand who's leading, who's aligning with the average, and where's there's room to improve. And the third example is how we use AI and digitization to completely transform how embodied carbon is assessed. So traditionally, this carbon assessment has been really slow, manual, and repetitive. A typical process starts with a bill of quantities, then moves through manual data entry, manual unit conversions, and EPD mapping. So before you finally get a carbon result, there's a lot of manual work need to be done. But with digitalization and AI, this entire process can happen pretty much instantly. So powered by our AI and digitized EPD database, we have developed NABERS, which is a AI copilot that handles the upfront carbon assessment. So you can simply drop a file, whether that's a bill of quantity or a QS cost plan or a beam schedule export or even a supplier invoice. NABERS automatically performs a upfront carbon assessment. It analyzes and maps every material item to the selected baseline carbon database, and then generate a full project carbon assessment under 30 minutes. So that means teams can now review, iterate, and compare low carbon options in real time, right from the design stage. And now it also adapts to different baselines and standard, whether you're working on NABERS, Greenstar, using the NABERS database or OZSCI or EPIC. Users can choose their own baseline database as per project requirement. And the other thing is when people talk about AI, they always tend to think, oh, it's a black box. We can't trace everything. But what we do is we actually provide the full transparency into how the AI thinks. So every mapping, every calculation logic, and where's the data come from, they're all fully traceable. So without having to understand where's the data come from, we actually present everything for you. So AI is not a black box. It's a tool that actually amplifies your work. And take a step further, once a project file is uploaded, now that the AI just doesn't calculate the baseline carbon, it also maps every line item to the right EPD category. And this is where AI-powered EPD mapping really changes the game. So instead of manually searching through hundreds of EPDs in PDF, Nala identifies the most relevant product EPDs for each line item. So users can actually go and explore alternatives across materials, suppliers, performance classes. We are also working to add a real intelligence layer to allow users to interact with the AI directly. So based on the output generated, users can ask the AI straight away to understand, right, so what's my carbon hotspot and what's the holistic picture of the carbon emission across different material types and building components. And if the user wants to dive deep into a specific material type, like say in-situ concrete, they can ask the AI to produce a detailed analysis with a zoom view for in-situ concrete to get information like what's the exact quantities from the slab, the column, the piles, and understand how it contributes to the total concrete emission. And with the support of our database, AI can also run reduction scenarios based on the project output. So users can ask AI directly to run some reduction scenarios based on their particular project requirement. So for example, here I've asked the AI to give me a 20% reduction scenario with a focus on concrete products. Then the AI follows my instruction and generates a scenario with a aggressive concrete optimization. And to understand how we get the result, you also can ask the AI to provide the full list of EPDs being used for analysis. And then you can dive into it and substantiate the output, the result. And after the analysis, users can even ask the AI to draft up a report to close the loop. All right, so to wrap up, what we've really seen today is that digitization is not just a technical upgrade, it's a system level enabler. So basically by transforming EPDs from static PDFs into living digitized data, we unlock a new level of insights and efficiency across the whole industry. It empowers the project team to make carbon data more accessible, transparent, and using real time. It supports suppliers by turning their verified EPD data into visibility, into market intelligence, and also enables policymakers and industry bodies to basically do benchmarking, policy making, and standard setting. So ultimately, this is how we should accelerate this transition from fragmented information to connected intelligence and from manual effort to automated insight. All right, thank you. And feel free to explore our database. It's all free for use for everyone. And if you have any questions, please reach out.
Jason, fantastic. Thank you very much. I think it's quite timely. There were a question from Rick Walters in the Q&A asking, is anybody looking at AI to streamline any of these processes? And there you are. So thank you for that. Esther, good to see you've got the camera on. Can I invite Rob, Jason, Nikki, and our last special guest, James Elks from NABERS. James, thank you for joining our panel. Now, I might actually throw to you first, just to give you some airtime. Look, you're a regular contributor and sharer of information in the MECLA universe, the MECLAverse. What's the NABERS perspective on, reducing emissions in buildings through ratings? Give us the elevator pitch. With your mic turned on, though.
Much better. Is that thanks?
Works heaps better. Yeah.
Before I do that, can I make a call out? There's lots of people in the audience. I had a look through the audience list. You got more questions for these guys? Come on, they got new stuff. It's untested. Put some difficult questions in for them. I'm the head of product development at NABERS. We've just released an embodied carbon tool that looks to measure and compare embodied carbon in buildings. Today, we're largely talking about products, though, but buildings are just a big stack of products, essentially. Side note, that did not go down well as a characterization of a building to the Australian Institute of Architects when I presented to them last year. So yeah, get some questions in. What I'm hearing across the panel is that, strong consensus. It's a big deal now. It's heading into C-suite. It's on their radar, and it needs to be embedded in procurement decisions. But there's a challenge when it comes to actually measuring the embodied carbon across rigor, accessibility, speed, and costs. And I think what we've heard previously, and I'm keeping this purposefully short because we don't have a lot of time, but we are going to have a lot of questions, aren't we, participants? There are both big problems, but also a bunch of solutions from, largely driven out of technology and modern process, because a lot of this stuff, like to Rob's earlier point, came out of the, how can somebody look so young and have worked in EPDs for so long? I don't know, Rob, but he's worked on this for like 30 years at this point, and we're still having these problems. But actually, in the last sort of 5 or so years, we've seen this kind of change in technology, and I don't necessarily mean AI, although I think that's part of it, that's allowing us to do stuff more accurately and faster, and we're seeing the curves of number of amounts of data going up, and it seems like for the most part quality is largely there. So I think that's my summary of where we've been today, Hudson. Back to you.
Thank you, James. Good to have you on the panel and part of the conversation, and for geeing up our audience to be asking tricky questions. It is tricky content, so I don't think they'll have to go out of their way for that. One of the questions I'd like to put to Jason Bovis has just come in from the Q&A, and I think it's a really apt one, considering the opportunities, but also the data security risks that AI presents. Asking about large-scale AI agents and the way they skim data from wherever they can get it. What is your take? What is your response to the security threat that comes with that? Well, it's the flip side of the opportunity of AI.
Yeah, I mean, we got asked this question quite a lot, like, especially with AI and especially with our industry, as some information is super confidential, it's not for shared, and how we make sure we actually control this data, and make sure it sort of align with the client, and you only control that client as well. So what we do is we segregate the data into different sort of areas and different for different client profile, rather than having the data like stored in a say for example, if you're using LLM in the US, and rather than having this data storage over there, we actually have the data managed locally in Australia and separate the client profiles based on the client request, and the data won't be used for the AI training. So we actively implementing different sort of like regulations and different framework to make this a safer place. But like, I think this is a question going to be asked all the time, and we need to actively looking into it and having solutions to address those data security problems.
And not unique to the EPD world. I think anybody dealing with data has this challenge now. Can I change the conversation now and ask around the users of this information, and probably a question first to Esther, and then I'd like Rob to come in. MECLA talks about systems change. So we have a design working group that's recently got going to look at how can we design out embodied carbon. We've got material specialist group like concrete, like steel, like building products, to look at, okay, we want the product to be the lowest carbon that it can be. So we've got product substitution, we've got better design, but procurement people need this data. Quantity surveyors need this data. Who are the users, do you think, who's your audience, who's your customer group for your product, Esther? And then Rob, keen to hear your perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was kind of, as I alluded to in my setup, I think it's diverse and getting even more diverse. So we've already teased out in this conversation the multitude of people involved in a building product, right? The architects have quite a different set of needs at cost planning and inspirational phase than the QSs do, or indeed that the NABERS do at the evidentiary stage. And so all of those people are looking for a slightly different take on the data, which is why, I would absolutely back in what Jason's saying about being data driven. And then some people will have it as a picture, and some people will have it, as a fully ingested into their Revit or their CAD or their BIM models. And some people will need it as a sheet of papers that can be subsequently audited. So I think thinking about those people as different people with different needs and different levels of evidence to have a pre-sales conversation as to prove that I need a 5-star NABERS rating, not a 6-star, very different. And we need to tease those apart. But almost more important than even that, I think, is this tsunami of scope 3 reporting that's going to come through climate disclosure. So it's in its reasonably early days. We've got the second cohort rolling on soon and be expected to report within 6 months. And in the first year, what you expect to see is a bit of a scramble and a whole bunch of people in the sort of CFO's office doing spend-based analyses. we bought this kind of stuff in this kind of category, and this kind of category is that number. That's fine from a planning and hotspotting, but it does not help you to act, because the next year is show me how you're going to reduce it. And that means you've got to flip across to people like us to say product A is better than product B. So we have to be able to answer that question. Is product A better than product B? And I know we're really leery, and I know it depends, and I know it's complexity, but ultimately that is the question that we need to be able to answer. And if you look to the European context, what you see is the major multinationals who've been doing this for a few years under the EU legislation turn around to their providers at the end of a financial year and say, these are the things that I bought from you. Tell me what the carbon number is. And they want this year's carbon number. They want the best carbon number. And then they're turning around to their customers and saying, and what's it going to be next year when I buy it again? Because you're my favorite chair maker or concrete supplier. But I need you, I've got a 10% reduction. What are you going to do to bring to the party? And when that actually kicks in, we're just seeing the early stages of it, but that is going to be significant. And those people are not just measuring building products, they are measuring everything that they buy. So if we don't simplify it, codify it, digitize it, make it available, we are going to miss a major opportunity that as sustainability professionals we've been working for a long time, to have this really informing and driving procurement decisions. So we've got an incredible opportunity here, and we need to stop, wringing our hands and get the job done and get carbon as a shadow currency that drives us towards net zero at speed.
I noticed the rather poignant comment made by Rick Waters in the webinar
Yes,
chat to
I saw
everybody.
that too. Yeah,
saying,
if we just did a proper price on carbon, this would actually not be required.
Yeah. There's a yes, where to go with that in Australia's climate wars? I shrug. But Rob, you also have a European background. I know Europe has been active in this space for a while. You have long industry experience. What's your take on the shifting users of information as well as the shifting supply of information?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. We saw initially when EPDs just sort of became a thing, it was used for access to market, for marketing opportunities, like front runners could showcase, hey, we're the first one to actually seriously address this issue. And EPD Australasia was set up in 2014. So we're talking just over 10 years ago, and this was still fairly niche. And there's been a few developments in the 10 years before that, but without sort of that uniform success, I would say. So that provided industry an opportunity. We then see as more information becomes available, the demand shifts as well. It's kind of similar with an LCA. The more you know, the more questions you end up with about the things you don't know about, how things come together. And so we've seen that sort of development where perhaps 5 years ago, maybe a bit longer, even the concrete sector, there's a lot of companies that actually didn't have a clear strategy as how to reduce their emissions from what I could tell, whereas now they have a pretty good handle as to what's driving the emissions, and they can come up with strategies, they can optimize their mix designs, all these kind of things to try to reduce that carbon footprint, and they'll offer lower carbon footprints. It's often now used for in contractual terms, where if you want to supply concrete to a large infrastructure or building project, you need to have an EPD or some other kind of information that helps you communicate that performance. What it does as well, I think, and interesting what Esther just alluded to, is the different needs and the different users. And I think looking at the data spectrum across product carbon footprinting, scope 3 emissions reporting for companies, all that sort of stuff, and different users do still have different needs, in my opinion. And we do have, to some extent, still a trade-off between accuracy or robustness and speed and cost. However, that's not uniform across all sectors. I mentioned before also in my presentation, the concrete sector has evolved dramatically and is quite advanced and should not be needing to do an EPD for every mix, in my opinion. I do a lot of them, but I don't even think that's necessary. I think a good tool agreed on the basic principles. We know that the mixing of the concrete contributes 2/3 of nothing. So it's all about the mix design and where your raw materials come from and how they're being transported. If you do that, you get to an enormous accuracy, if you do that well, without the need for having that verified over and over again. And I fully agree that pre-verified tools are very important there. And finally, the asphalt sector has recognized that about 7, 8 years ago, I think. When we looked at the bitumen data, we found globally they varied by roughly a factor 3 in the carbon intensity. Good luck picking which one is the accurate one, right? And often there is not a single number that actually is that accurate. You end up in a situation where it's more important to be have agreed data so that you have that level playing field and you can compete on a fair basis rather than outcompeting each other with lower numbers.
So how do we get to a point where we are looking at apples with apples comparisons for baseline inputs? I appreciate that there's quite a lot of comment about the variability there, and I can see, Jason, you're responding as well. But if a layperson, or sorry, not a layperson, but an industry participant is looking to inform themselves, whether it's a procurement decision or a design decision, contracting, as was mentioned also, how do we, as an industry, get to a point where, yep, I can compare, one EPD with another, or a EPD with a product carbon footprint on its talking carbon, to know, well, yep, now I can make an informed decision, even though they're from different products, from different equivalent products, but from different suppliers. What's the way to communicate to the non-data specialist how to make a decision? Maybe Jason, and then, or yep, Jason.
Am I on? Yep. Okay.
Yep. It's you.
So I think it's a good point, Hudson, and it's something I was on about well before I even got into this space. And I think one of the frustrating things from a technically minded person who likes to get into the detail and understand where the data comes from, is when a rule changes, the EPD stays valid for 5 years. So how can you can't technically, we can't really look at EPDs now and say, well, before June 20th for EPD international EPDs, the rule changed. Now, how much did it impact it? Who knows? But we need the ability to update things and update things quickly. And I'll say the layperson who, I was a layperson probably 2 years ago before I really started to get into this. You just don't understand that, and there's major commercial decisions being made on these things, and we need to make sure that the data is accurate. And to Rob's point, I agree 100%. Yeah, whether you use fuel in mixing in A3 or in A4, it doesn't make a huge difference. But the A3 number is the one that's being reported. It's the A3 number that decisions are being made on. Do you supply the concrete or do you not? Do you pay extra for your concrete or do you not? Okay, we need to get the data right. And that's where I've railed and I've said in the presentation, we need to move away from you need to be purely an LCA expert in this field to you need to actually know concrete. You need to know concrete production. You need to know cement production. You need to know admixture production. We need that oversight as well as the other oversights. But I believe the other oversights can easily be solved by AI. And that's just my thought. So I'd love to have a situation where things just get updated. Yep. So the layperson doesn't need to think about rules. They don't need to think about anything else. It just happens. You don't have this situation where a concrete supplier, for instance, has to think, is it worth going through all that, before we came along, that rigmarole about getting another EPD just because we've got a new supplier of a material, or we've come up with a new way of making low carbon concrete, or a rule's changed, or something like that. It should just update automatically. I'm disappointed that it hasn't happened already, but hopefully new market entrants coming in, there'll be a bit of a push to actually get these sort of things moving.
Jason, thank you. Now, look, I've just seen the time and realised that we are at time. I'd like to thank you all very much for telling us your perspective on what is emerging, what is new technology. I think the digitization brings with it challenges, but also brings with it huge opportunity. Jason Bovis, thank you for your perspective on that. I've enjoyed hearing also Nikki and Jason tag teaming from a material expertise perspective to then look at the EPD side of things and bring those two skill sets together. I think that's been very interesting. And as to your perspective on using the EPD standards and assurance, but on the single criteria of carbon criterion of carbon, that's been good to hear. And Rob, yes, I think you've set out challenges which everybody is agreeing with. So I think that consistency and quality of data is going to be very important. The transparency, particularly so. James, NABERS is a user of all of that data. Can I give you the closing remark, maybe?
Yeah, we're 1 minute past, but like, how exciting is it that we're having this conversation, that we're kind of on the pathway to sorting out the data? Because like, it's really interesting and really technical, but in the end, what do we want to be doing? We want to be driving down the amount of carbon that's being emitted to our atmosphere. And the sooner we can get past how do we measure it and get into measuring it and reducing it, the better we'll be. Excellent. And it will be for our children. And
this recording will be on our MECLA resources page, viewable on YouTube. Your company information is in your slides, so people will be able to access those. People in MECLA love to talk about this stuff, so stand by for a barrage of questions and follow-up emails to all of you. Thank you for your time now. A big thank you behind the scenes also to Monica Richter from WWF, Kati Verheyen from Climate Kick, who has worked so hard on the secretariat side of things, Alexi for getting this up and running. A big thank you to my teenage son and his mullet for delaying my entry to the session, but that's parenting for you. And to our audience, thank you guys. MECLA is a do tank because people are interested and want to get on with things. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your contribution and the active discussion in the Q&A. We've answered as many, I think, as we could have in the time, but clearly a space that continues to emerge. Stay tuned. Keep your eye on our socials for other announcements from MECLA. But for now, thank you very much. Have a good evening. See you later.